Let's open our Bibles tonight to Esther chapter 6. We're going to read the first 10 verses. We may stop at verse 9, but we'll read 10 just to be safe. On that night, could not the king sleep, and he commanded to bring the book of records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's chamberlains, the keepers of the door, who sought to lay hand on the king Ahasuerus. And the king said, "What honor and what dignity hath been done to Mordecai for this?" Then said the king's servant that ministered unto him, "There is nothing done for him." And the king said, "Who is in the court?" Now Haman was come into the outward court of the king's house to speak unto the king to hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. The king's servant said unto him, "Behold, Haman standeth in the court." And the king said, "Let him come in." So Haman came in, and the king said unto him, "What shall be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor?" Haman thought in his heart, "To whom would the king delight to do honor more than to myself?" And Haman answered the king, "For the man whom the king delighteth to honor, let the royal apparel be brought which the king used to wear, and the horse that the king rideth upon, and the crown royal which is set upon his head. And let this apparel and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that they may array the man withal whom the king delighteth to honor, and bring him on horseback through the street of the city, and proclaim before him, This shall it be done to the man whom the king delighteth to honor." And the king said to Haman, "Make haste, take the apparel and the horse, as thou hast said, and do even so to Mordecai the Jew, that sitteth at the king's gate. Let nothing fail of all that thou hast spoken." As I said this morning, this section is one of my favorite sections in the entire book of Esther. Mordecai had previously defied Haman by refusing to bow down and worship Haman. Haman became so enraged over Mordecai's behavior that he convinced the king to kill every single Jew in the entire country. After 3 days of fasting and prayer, Esther dared to enter into the king's inner chamber. When the king saw her, he held out the golden scepter and said, "What is so important that you have risked your life to come in and ask me?" Esther said, "All I want is for you and Haman to come to dinner tonight." King says, "Haman, get dressed we're going to the queen's house for dinner. At dinner, the king says again, what was so important that you risk your life to ask? And Esther said, all I want is for you and Haman to come to dinner tomorrow night. Not much to ask. Haman is so thrilled at receiving such an honor that he left there jubilant, joyful, happy, like a we used to call it an old banny rooster. Y'all probably don't know what that is, but he walked out of there so proud and so cocky. I, of all the kingdom, of all the princes, me and me only was invited to eat with the king and the queen. On his way home, he sees Mordecai refusing to bow down and worship him. Suddenly, all of his anger comes back. His rage overcomes him. And so he hurries home and he tells his wife and his close friends what had happened, and they agree what you need to do is not wait till the end of the year. That's when all Jews will be killed. You don't need to wait till then. You need to build the gallows tonight, and first thing in the morning, you get down to the palace, get the king to sign off on hanging Mordecai first thing tomorrow morning. And so that night, the gallows is built. Early the next morning, Haman is at the king's palace before the crack of dawn. He gets there bright and early so that he can get permission to hang Mordecai right then and not have to wait. Now, let's pause for just a moment. Let's go back in time a few months back and see what happened. Just remember what happened. In Esther chapter 2, in verse 21, 22, and 23, two of the king's chamberlains tells us tonight that they were the keepers of the door. They were the ones, if somebody came in that was not supposed to, they kept the door. They would immediately take off your head, and they were right in the very room with the king. It would be very easy for them to walk up and cut the king's head off, and the king would be dead. So Mordecai found out about their plot. Mordecai sends word to Esther, you need to warn the king. Esther goes in, tells the other chamberlains, the other guards, hey, there's a plot to kill the king. They investigate, find out that there really is a plot to assassinate the king. And of course, the two men are then arrested. They are taken out, and they are killed for plotting an assassination. An official record was made in the book of the king. Now, I was told today, and I haven't looked it up, but I'm pretty sure it's correct, that everything the president does is archived. There's a record made. Who came to see the king? What did they talk about? In our case, the president. To get into the White House, you have to go through all kinds of red tape, and everybody that enters the White House that is going to be anywhere close to the president, people think he's a king, he's not. It is recorded. Saudi Arabia's prime prince visited President Trump on such a day at such a time. Here's what they discussed. Everything is recorded. Somebody recorded Mordecai heard a plot to kill the king. Mordecai sent word to the king, and the king's life was spared. Now, evidently, somebody dropped the ball, because the king never heard about the plot. Highly unusual, very unlikely. And so the king never knew that Mordecai had saved his life. Mordecai was not even given a thank you. Nobody said, Mordecai, thank you for saving the king's life. He didn't get a thank you card from the king or any of his princes. Nothing. He saved the king's life and didn't get a single thing out of it. He was totally overlooked. Nobody thanked him. Nobody honored him. It was written in the official record book, but nobody else higher up knew anything about it. Have you ever felt unappreciated? After all I did for them, they didn't even say thank you. I remember this was many years before I came here. I traveled about 300 miles to preach for a preacher friend. 300 miles back, he never once said, thank you for coming. Never offered to reimburse me for gas, which was only 15, 20 cents a gallon. But when you're making $1 an hour, that's a lot of money. Never said thank you. Never sent a thank you card. Never did anything to say, hey, thank you for coming and preaching. And I thought, wait till he needs a preacher next time. He can just call somebody else. And it's like, no. Two wrongs don't make a right. And he did call me back, and I went back, and I preached again. Still no thank you, no nothing, no anything. But have you ever felt totally unappreciated? You do something nice, and they don't even have the decency to say thank you. You can almost imagine perhaps how Mordecai must have felt. I saved the king's life, and nobody even said thank you. Very overlooked. It was written in the record book, put on the shelf, and forgotten about. Now, months go by. And in verse 1, on that night. I'm one of those people that think every word in the Bible is important. Why was it on that night that the king could not sleep? Why not the night before? Why not the night after? Why was it on that night the king could not sleep? Why that night? Well, if you've been reading along with me, that night was the night Haman was building the gallows. That night was the night that Haman planned to go see the king to hang Mordecai. If the king had been awake a week before, it would not have worked. Had the king been awake a week after, Mordecai would have been dead. But it was on that night, that very night, that Haman was building the gallows and going in to have Mordecai hung. That night, of all the nights of the year, that night the king could not sleep. Tell me God's not in control. I love this because it shows how God is in control right down to the most minute details. Why could not the king sleep that night? You know, I find it interesting. The Bible doesn't say. So I'm going to use some imagination. I can imagine Mordecai went home, went to bed, slept like a baby. But that night, the king could not sleep. The king who had everything you could hope for. Well, he must have eaten something that didn't agree with him. You know, I've learned that some things do tend to bother you more than other things. And then there are people that say, wow, Mordecai was really lucky that the king couldn't sleep that night. Well, you know what I think about luck, don't you? Luck only exists in the minds of those that don't know God. Knowing that God is in control of the most minute detail. Why should I worry? We sing a song, I think. Why should I worry? Why should I fret? You'll have to help me with the rest of it. If God is in control of anything, then he's in control of everything. Many Christians are robbed of their joy. They spend a lot of time worrying over everything. Well, what if this happens? What if that happens? What if I lose my job? What if I have a wreck? What if, the house burns down? What if? There are no what ifs if God is in complete control. Right up to the fact, again, maybe he ate something. Maybe there was stress in the kingdom. Now, I've learned that if I drink too much caffeine too late in the day, it keeps me awake. Does it do anybody else? Yeah. Well, maybe the king drank caffeine that day. I'm sure Maxwell House coffee is probably what kept him awake all night long. Maybe it was stress. Being king is stressful. No, the king could not sleep because God wouldn't let him sleep that night. Have you ever had nights that you just can't sleep? I've had many of them. Like I said, drinking caffeine late in the day will keep me awake for that night and part of the next day. But maybe, and I applied this to me before I put it in my notes for you all, maybe we were so busy that we didn't have time to talk to God during the day, so he keeps us awake so that, okay, I'm not going to let you go to sleep. You're going to talk to me one way or the other. I find that sometimes I have my best conversations with God on the nights that I cannot go to sleep. Sometimes I'll get up and read. Somebody said, you don't have to read, just put one of your sermons on. That puts me out. Well, I don't like to listen to myself, but sometimes I'll get up and read, and lo and behold, the book that I pick, the chapter that I pick, is exactly what I needed to finish a sermon. Y'all think that's crazy, don't you? It's like, I can't sleep. I'm not going to lay here and toss and turn all night. I'm going to go in the family room and I'm going to read, and I pick a book and I start reading, and it's like, right there's the answer I needed. Right there's the final point of a sermon that I needed. Or sometimes there's the answer. I've been struggling how to deal with the situation, and when I can't sleep, I read, and it's as if God says, right there on that page is the solution to the frustration and the problem that you're trying to have or that you're trying to deal with. When God keeps me awake, it's always for a purpose. Think about that for a minute. When you can't sleep, maybe God's got something better for you. Like I said, reading, I can't even begin to count all the times I would get up and read because I couldn't sleep. And lo and behold, there is the very answer that I've been trying to find for days and weeks. Maybe the lack of sleep will cause something the next day that will change your life forever. Look at Ahasuerus. He could not sleep, and his lack of sleep set about a course of action that literally changed the world. All because he could not sleep. So what did he do? He called for the official court records. Now, I can think of a lot of things I'd rather read than the minutes of every meeting and every event that happened. But the king said, hey, whoever's on duty tonight, go get a book, bring it in, and read it to me. Now, why did the person that went to the archives to pick out a book, of all the hundreds of books on the shelf, why did the reader pick that book? I mean, the King's Archives probably had hundreds, maybe hundreds and hundreds of books of everything that had happened. And so the guy goes in, it's like, wow, 100 books here. Which one do I pick to read to the king? And he goes, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Okay, I'll pick this one. Why that book on that night? Why not pick a book from 2 years ago? Why not pick another book that had something else in it? Why did he pick that book on that night to read to the king? Again, if you believe in luck, I feel sorry for you. I think God directed him to that book. And when he brought it in and opened it up, why did he open it to that chapter? Because that was the chapter that told about Mordecai saving the king's life. Had he picked any other book, history would have been different. Had he picked a different chapter, history would have been different. But God directed him to that book, that chapter, because God is fixing to do something fantastic. And so he begins to read. On such and such a date, at such and such a time, a man named Mordecai overheard 2 chamberlains plot to assassinate the king. And so he's reading this to the king. And the king says, what did we do to show our appreciation to a man who saved my life? And the guy said, and he read, and he said, well, according to the official documents, King, we didn't even say thank you to him. We didn't give him a party. We didn't give him the Congressional Medal of Honor. From what I read, King, we never did anything to show our appreciation for saving your life. The king must have been shocked to hear that the very man who saved his life had never even been thanked. I feel sorry for people who believe in blind luck. I do. I feel sorry for them. And so the king does what any king would do. They had advisors that someone would stay in the palace all night, all day. There was always someone in the palace in case the king needed advice 24/7. Somebody was always there to go in and give the king advice. Now, who determined to be the first person in the palace the next morning to ask to hang Mordecai? If Haman comes to mind, you're right on. Haman was there bright and early. Since he was the second in command, he would be the perfect person to know what to do to show our appreciation to the man that saved the king's life. Now, why did Haman arrive at that exact minute. The guy that had been there all night was off duty. He leaves. Haman walks in. What if Haman had been 15 minutes late and the next advisor had come in and taken the place of the night advisor? The next advisor would have been called in instead of Haman. The timing of this. Haman had to get there at the precise time that the other advisor was leaving. So when the king said, "What advisor is on duty?" "Oh, Haman's out there." If he had been 15 minutes late, he would not have been out there. I don't like traffic lights, particularly when they're red. But sometimes God may use a red light to slow me down, to get me to pause, because who knows what might have happened had I not got that light red. King says, "Haman, come in. I need some advice. There's a man in my kingdom that I want to honor with the greatest honor possible. What do you suggest?" To show you how arrogant, how egotistical, and how narcissistic Haman was, he thinks to himself, in all of the kingdom, who deserves to be honored more than me? Yeah. And so his pride comes through. And it's like, how would I like to be honored? And so he comes up with this extravagant idea to ride on the king's horse, to put on the king's robe, to have someone march him through the streets hollering, "This is what happens to the man the king wants to honor." He thought, I would really love that. And then the king said, "I want you to do everything you just said to Mordecai the Jew." Who does Haman hate more than anybody on earth? Mordecai. Who was he there to hang that very morning? Mordecai. And I can only imagine the look on his face when the king said, "You are my highest authority. I want you to do everything you just said to Mordecai." I can almost see it. I can almost see his jaw drop. I thought this was for me. I deserve it far more than Mordecai. You're going to humiliate me. Pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. We've put up with Haman now for months. We've seen his rage. We've seen his hatred. We've seen him plot and plan to destroy the Jews. And now God in providence is turning the tide against Haman. There are some people that, and I want to be very careful how I say this. There are some people that I would grieve very deeply if something happened to them. There are some people that I would not grieve nearly as much if God just moved them out of my way. You know, send them to California. That's where they need to be. You know, send them to Mexico. Just get them out of my way. And it doesn't happen. They continue to be a thorn in your flesh. They continue to eat at you, to gnaw at you. But don't think for a moment that God doesn't know what's going on. And the tide's fixing to turn on Haman. But you're going to have to wait till next week to see what happened, to see how Haman reacted, and to see how that God turned everything around. All because the king could not sleep that night. The recorder got that set of books, opened them to that chapter, and Haman just happened to be in the king's palace to give the king how to honor someone. Accident? No way.